Salvete, and welcome to Weekly Roman History. I'm your host, as usual, Madeline Weiner. My Instagram is up there if you want to follow me, and don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. If you've been watching these all in a row, when was the last time you had a break? This is part 18 on the Nerva-Antonian Dynasty, including what are often called the 5 good emperors. But first, a bit of review. How many emperors were there in the year 69 CE? If you said 4, you're right on. 69 CE is the infamous Year of the 4 Emperors, a bloody year of civil war that ended in the rule of Vespasian. Next, what was the relationship between Vespasian and the next 2 Flavian emperors? If you said they were his sons, you're correct. The Flavian dynasty was a compact little dynasty of 3 emperors, a father and his 2 sons, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. They took power through armed coup, and they fell to a conspiracy of the nobility to murder Domitian. The dynasty that follows is not a dynasty in the traditional sense, because the emperors in it, for the most part, do not go looking for their successors among their close family. They adopt adult successors who have already proven themselves capable of the position. It's a remarkably stable period in Roman history, which comes crashing down as soon as one of the emperors changes the pattern and makes his son his heir. Since the dynasty isn't family-based, it has various names. These emperors are often called the Nervan-Antonian Dynasty, or the Adoptive Emperors. But their most well-known title is the 5 Good Emperors, which necessarily leaves out the 6th member of the dynasty, Commodus, who was neither adopted nor good. At the death of Domitian, the Senate decides to name the next emperor. They choose Nerva, who at 66 is one of their oldest and most respected members. Nerva is 20 years older than Domitian was at his death. He's old and ill, but it's his age and spotless respectability that the Senate values. He has been influential under every emperor since Nero, and come through the decades of turmoil with his reputation intact. Nerva also represents a return to aristocracy after the middle-class background of the Flavians. Nerva gains the support of the people quickly, but can't win over the army. The army had loved Domitian, both because he had military experience and because he'd treated them well, especially raising their pay. Nerva has no military experience and has taken power over the dead body of their hero. They threaten revolt. In 97, the Praetorian Guard goes into open revolt, demanding to kill the conspirators who killed Domitian. Nerva opposes them, but is powerless to stop them from hunting down and murdering Domitian's murderers. Nerva knows his position is delicate. He could easily go the way of the first 3 emperors of the Year of the 4 Emperors, go down in a military coup after only a few months. He needs to win the support of the military somehow. Nerva is elderly and childless, so he has one powerful tool: his heir. If he adopts someone who can gain the military's full support, he can live out the rest of his reign in peace. He chooses Trajan, a governor in Upper Germany, an immensely respected general. He adopts Trajan as his son and heir. It's a political move, not a family one. Trajan is a 44-year-old general. Nerva does not become Trajan's father in any meaningful sense. It's just a legal move, a way to have Trajan inherit the throne. Trajan uses his power to squash resistance, and the promise of him as next emperor is enough to keep the army happy. Nerva rules without serious opposition. Most notably, he sets up the alimenta, a sort of welfare program or dole for the poor that is very successful. It is frequently updated and improved by later emperors, and it runs continuously for 200 years after Nerva's reign. Nerva only reigns for 16 months before dying of an illness. His most impactful act is making Trajan his heir, not only because Trajan leaves a big footprint on the empire, but also because of the precedent Nerva sets. Nerva adopts a proven and capable successor, rather than looking in his own family. This sets the mold for the 5 good emperors, and ushers in one of Rome's most stable and prosperous centuries. Trajan is considered among the greatest emperors in Roman history. He shows a genuine concern for governing well in the city and the provinces. He also has an excellent relationship with the Senate. As you might predict, since he was a general before becoming emperor, he has a military focus. He expands Rome's borders to their greatest extent, either before or after. His physique, which he is sure to show off in his busts, reflects his focus on military strength. I always tell my students to remember that biggest pecs means biggest empire. But this military focus means that Trajan's legacy becomes less universally positive when we incorporate non-Roman viewpoints into our understanding of history. Trajan conquers for the sake of power, causing needless suffering among non-Romans. Trajan is the first emperor to come from outside Italy. He was born in Spain, though his family was old Italian nobility. He started his career in the army. He governed well in Germany before being selected by Nerva as his successor. Then he was instrumental in lending stability to Nerva's government, though he remained in Germany. At Nerva's death, Trajan doesn't rush to Rome. He is confident enough in his position to take his time. He takes a tour to inspect the frontiers before entering the capital in 99 CE. He is greeted by throngs of cheering Romans and grateful senators. Trajan enters on foot and mingles with the crowd, embracing senators to show his modesty and approachability. He maintains this veneer of modesty throughout his reign, constantly appearing to defer to the Senate's wisdom, even as he pulls the strings. This is the talent that separates good emperors from tyrants, the ability to observe all the niceties and keep the Senate happy. Trajan continues a trend that started with Augustus, the trend of professionalizing the work of government. He creates bureaucracies headquartered in Rome to do all sorts of things in the provinces that used to be outsourced to local control during the Republic. Trajan also expands the alimenta, restores infrastructure like roads and bridges, and is a huge patron of games, guaranteeing the people love him. But of course, Trajan's reputation depends mostly on war. When he takes the throne, Rome's neighbors are actually unusually peaceful, so Trajan's many campaigns probably reflect a desire for military action, rather than any threat to Rome. Trajan wages two big wars in Dacia in 101 and 105. Dacia is a region in Eastern Europe, present-day Romania, rich in gold, silver, and iron mines. Trajan adds Dacia as a province. He captures tons of gold and silver, and enslaves 50,000 Dacians. Roman immigrants flood into Dacia to replace them. With the riches gained from this conquest, Trajan builds a massive new forum in Rome, the biggest built during the empire. Trajan's column goes up in this forum. It's enormous and features sculptures of the conquest of Dacia all the way up. But for all this glory, Dacia doesn't actually remain in Roman control for very long. Trajan's next war begins in 114. This one is in the Middle East, against the Parthians, the people who killed Crassus. Trajan gains early victories and expands Roman control to the Persian Gulf for the first time ever, with the new province of Mesopotamia. But it doesn't last. The Parthians push back, and Trajan is forced to withdraw in 117. A Jewish revolt has spread to Egypt and Cyprus, and there's unrelated trouble in the north. Trajan heads back to Rome to deal with these crises. His health has been in decline, and he suffers a stroke while traveling. Trajan dies shortly afterward. He is, of course, deified. The Romans hold him up as a model ruler for centuries to come. He is even beloved by medieval Christian sources, who are usually hostile to any non-Christian figures. Okay, a few questions for review. First, what was the name of the welfare system set up by this dynasty to help the poor of Rome? It was called the alimenta. Next, what two provinces did Trajan add, bringing Rome to its largest ever size? If you said Dacia and Mesopotamia, you're right. The empire falls next to Trajan's heir, Hadrian. Hadrian's father was Trajan's cousin. The family was provincial, but Trajan's rise brought them all up with him. Trajan was fond of young Hadrian and ushered him through his early career in law courts and the army. But Hadrian was far from the only candidate for heir. His adoption came at the last minute, on Trajan's deathbed, and many at the time believed that it was Trajan's wife who influenced the final choice. 4 of the men frustrated at the choice are accused of plotting against Hadrian, and all 4 are executed. They were all former consuls, so men of the highest prestige. It's a scandal that gets Hadrian's reign started on the wrong foot. The Senate is insulted that he would execute such important men. Hadrian deflects blame and claims not to have been involved in the whole thing. Hadrian is a very different sort of emperor than Trajan. Hadrian is more suited for peace than for war. He is a lover of philosophy and learning. Unsurprisingly, he is also a great admirer of Greek culture. He brings the Greek-style full beard back into fashion. Roman men have been mostly clean-shaven for the last few centuries, and Hadrian marks the beginning of a long era of Roman beards. Hadrian quickly makes peace with Trajan's adversaries and pulls out of some of his conquered territory. Scaling back wars allows him to scale back taxes, which makes him popular. He also goes on tour. Hadrian is the most well-traveled of the emperors. He visits nearly all of Rome's territory. He orders the construction of a fortified wall in Britain to mark the line between Roman territory in the south and Caledonia, or Scotland, in the north. Hadrian's Wall marks the boundary for most of the rest of Roman history, and still stands in places today. In his mostly peaceful reign, Hadrian is largely concerned with matters of administration and law. He also takes on building projects. He is an amateur architect and designs some public buildings for Rome and Athens himself. His most famous building still stands in Rome, the Pantheon, which was built originally by Augustus's general Agrippa and renovated in grand style by Hadrian. Hadrian added the massive concrete dome, which is an engineering marvel even today. He is less successful as a poet than as an architect. What little of his poetry survives is not very good, and he's very sensitive when it comes to his art. He persecutes and murders some of his critics. Hadrian is also famous for his love affairs with men, another aspect that brings him in line with the ancient Greeks. Most prominent is his love for Antoninus, a teenager who Hadrian brings on one of his tours of the provinces. The age difference is gross, but not unusual for the time, unfortunately. Poor Antoninus falls off a boat and dies in the Nile River in Egypt. Hadrian goes over the top with his grief. He founds a new city, Antinopolis, at the site of the death. He names a star after him, and he puts up an absolutely incredible amount of statues of Antoninus all across the provinces. Archaeologists have unearthed more statues of Antoninus than they found of most emperors. Toward the end of his reign, Hadrian tries to extend his building projects to Judea. He wants to rebuild the city of Jerusalem on a Greco-Roman plan, including rebuilding the Temple of Solomon destroyed by Titus as a temple to Jupiter. His plans outrage the citizens there, kicking off another Jewish revolt from 132 to 135 that is Hadrian's only war. Hadrian is genuinely shocked. He can't conceive of any of his subjects wanting to reject the Greco-Roman ideals he holds dear. Hadrian pursues his only war ruthlessly. When he concludes the conflict, he bars Jews from living in Jerusalem, contributing to the scattering of the Jewish people from their homeland that marks much of the rest of Jewish history. There's this really awful statue of Hadrian from this time, triumphantly crushing a little Jewish boy under his foot. You have to wonder how anyone can sculpt this and think, yeah, I'm definitely showing the good guy in this story. After this fight, Hadrian turns inward and is a much less energetic ruler. The end of Hadrian's reign is marked by a long, terrible illness. He adopts an heir, Commodus, outraging some other senators who feel passed over. Those who speak out against his choice are killed. It's a repeat of the scandal from the beginning of his reign. But it's all for naught. Commodus dies of tuberculosis, and Hadrian has to find someone else. He spends his final days in pain and yearning for death, before finally handing power to his new successor, Antoninus Pius. He retires to the resort town of Baiae and dies almost immediately afterward. Hadrian had been quite popular and had a prosperous reign, but he had become largely hated at the end. His legacy is of an ambitious and gifted emperor limited by his vanity and paranoia. Hadrian's heir, Antoninus Pius, is a caretaker emperor. He is a man of even temper, without much ambition. Hadrian had wanted his 16-year-old nephew, Marcus Aurelius to become emperor, but he was too young. So he adopted Antoninus, a 51-year-old senator, on the condition that Antoninus adopt Verus. The idea being that Antoninus wouldn't live that much longer and could hand the reins over to Verus when he died. Hadrian couldn't have predicted that Antoninus would live into his 70s and reign for 25 years, longer than any emperor since Augustus. At Hadrian's death, the Senate doesn't want to deify him. Antoninus protests. He refuses to take the throne if the Senate won't properly honor his predecessor. So Hadrian is deified, and Antoninus gains his nickname, Pius, meaning dutiful. Antoninus stays in Rome for his entire reign, in contrast to Hadrian's constant motion. He is moderate and peaceful and works in perfect harmony with the Senate. It is a mark of Antoninus Pius's stability and skill as an administrator that there is not much notable to report from his lengthy reign. We can compare Antoninus to the peaceful king Numa Pompilius, though he has one important advantage over him. Antoninus was real. This period is a climax of sorts in the empire. We are nearing the end of the Pax Romana. Antoninus dies of a brief illness and hands power, as promised, to Hadrian's nephew, Verus. He is deified without argument. When Marcus Aurelius Verus takes the throne, he takes the name Marcus Aurelius, and he doesn't take the throne alone. Antoninus Pius had adopted Marcus at 16, and also the 7-year-old Lucius Caonius Commodus, son of Hadrian's heir who had died. Hadrian had intended only Marcus Aurelius to inherit the throne, and that's how Antoninus left it. But Marcus himself insisted that Lucius Commodus be elevated as an equal co-emperor. Lucius confusingly takes the name Lucius Verus. It's the first time Rome has ever had two equal emperors at once. which sets a precedent that will be greatly elaborated upon in the late Empire. Where Hadrian and Antoninus managed mostly to avoid war, Marcus Aurelius can't escape it. He isn't eager for war as Trajan was, but he winds up spending most of his 20 years on the throne fighting. First, in 161, the Parthians retake some of what Trajan had captured in the east. Lucius Verus leads forces personally. He retakes Armenia and captures the Parthian capital. He and Marcus get to celebrate the first triumph since Trajan 50 years earlier. But Verus's troops bring a deadly epidemic back from the east, which might have been smallpox. The illness ravages Rome in 167 and sticks around for another 25 years. Next, in 168, the Germans invade over the Danube River, and Marcus and Lucius both set out to deal with it. Verus dies on the road of a stroke in 169, leaving Marcus Aurelius sole emperor. This campaign against the Germans will consume the rest of Marcus Aurelius's life. The conditions in the north are rough. It's bitter cold in the winter. Over his years on campaign, Marcus writes a work of Stoic philosophy in Greek called the Meditations. It's a bleak yet inspirational work in which Marcus theorizes about the nature of the good. In it, he states his belief that war is contrary to the good, but that every human must do their own duty on earth, and his duty as emperor involves war. Marcus Aurelius's excellent reputation as emperor rests more on the Meditations than on anything tangible he did during his reign. The book shows the greatness of his spirit and the depth of his mind, and it's still widely read today. Marcus Aurelius is known as the philosopher emperor. In the East, in 175, a rumor spreads that Marcus has died in Germany, and a formerly loyal military commander declares himself emperor to replace him. Several eastern provinces declare loyalty to the pretender, and he rules the East for 4 months before those loyal to Marcus Aurelius kill him. To avoid such mix-ups in the future, Marcus Aurelius declares his son Commodus his heir, and elevates him to co-emperor, leaving no doubt who is supposed to inherit the throne. You'll notice that Marcus named his son after the family of his last co-emperor, who was Lucius Commodus before becoming Lucius Verus. Marcus Aurelius falls ill in Germany in 180. He has been unwell for many years and dependent on a drug called theriac, which contains opium. His final illness lasts less than a week. He is said to have asked his friends on his deathbed, "Why weep for me when we all must die someday?" Which is a really typical thing for a Stoic philosopher to say, and he's not wrong, but come on. He is, of course, deified. At Marcus Aurelius's death, his son Commodus takes over as he'd planned. This breaks the precedent of the past 80 years. He leaves the throne to a close family member instead of adopting a proven successor, and brings the era of the 5 good emperors to a close. That's the traditional assessment, but perhaps it isn't really fair. For one thing, all the Antonine emperors before Marcus Aurelius had no natural sons to inherit. We have no reason to believe they wouldn't have done the same thing in Marcus's shoes. For another, everyone in the dynasty does share some blood tie. They weren't just looking for any good future ruler. They were searching in their own families, like all the prior emperors were. So the so-called adoptive emperors probably weren't as unusual as they're often made out to be. Okay, a few questions for review. First, which temple did Hadrian renovate in grand style? If you said the Pantheon, you're right. If you said the Parthenon, I get those confused all the time too. The Parthenon is in Athens. Remember that Pantheon in Rome means all the gods, Pantheon. Next, why was Antoninus Pius made emperor? It was because Hadrian needed a placeholder. His choice for successor, Marcus Aurelius, wasn't old enough yet. It just so happened that Antoninus Pius had one of the longest reigns in Roman history. Finally, what did Marcus Aurelius write? If you said philosophy, you're right. Specifically, he wrote the Meditations, a work of Stoic philosophy that is still beloved today. Commodus is the first ever emperor to be born in the purple, meaning born while his father was emperor. He has been raised with the expectation of becoming emperor for his entire life. Commodus was the 10th of 14 children born to Marcus Aurelius and his wife Faustina, but the only son to make it to adulthood. Marcus prepared him to become emperor from an early age. He declared Commodus Caesar when he was 5, and elevated him to joint Augustus at age 15. When Marcus dies in 180, he leaves Commodus in charge at only 18 years old. Commodus's first act is to bring his father's German wars to a hasty conclusion so he can head back to Rome. It's contrary to his father's wishes, but the peace terms are favorable to Rome, and the treaties hold up for decades. Commodus is not interested in actually ruling when he gets back to Rome. He acts a lot like Nero, leaves the real governing to members of his staff, and lives a life of ease and luxury. He also acts erratically toward the Senate, gaining him powerful enemies. There's an assassination attempt in 182, which is backed by the Senate and Commodus' sister. Commodus is shaken by the attempt and retreats from public life entirely, giving full control of the empire to his praetorian commander, Perennis. Perennis is corrupt and ambitious, and holds power until 185, when a group of soldiers come to Commodus to protest. Commodus kills Perennis and replaces him with his butler, Cleander, who is just as bad. Cleander notoriously sells public offices. In 1 year, there are 25 consuls. A grain shortage hits in 190, and Cleander's corruption makes it worse. The Roman people protest in the Circus Maximus and march 4 miles to Commodus's country house to demand change. Commodus executes Cleander and decides it's time to stop leaving things to others. He announces that he'll take real power himself. The people cheer. But the excitement doesn't last long. Commodus is a hopeless megalomaniac. There are constant treason trials and executions. He has himself deified while living to ward off assassination attempts, and starts to dress up as Hercules with the trademark lion skin and club. He gives himself enough honorary names to make sure he has 12 names, then renames all 12 months after himself. They go back to normal after his death. Most famously, Commodus takes to the arena as a gladiator. Just like Nero, he's more interested in performing than in governing. And like Nero and his music, Commodus' love for performing goes against the dignity expected from an emperor. Performing of all kinds, including gladiatorial combat, is low and shameful in Roman society. And of course, Commodus' fights, mostly against animals, are heavily rigged. He isn't risking his safety. It's all a pathetic power fantasy for him. In 191, a serious fire destroys a bunch of important temples, including the Temple of Vesta that houses the Palladium, the statue of Pallas Minerva thought to have been brought to Italy by Aeneas himself. Commodus rebuilds these areas and uses this as an excuse to declare himself a new founder of Rome. As the construction finishes, he develops a plan. On January 1st, 193, he will rededicate the city, renaming Rome after himself, Colonia Commodiana. Normally on January 1st, the new consuls would be sworn in. The new consuls have already been nominated, but Commodus decides he will take the stage for the swearing in dressed as a gladiator and kill both new consuls, beginning the first year of the new era. He will be the sole ruler of his new city. Commodus' inner circle knows his plan, so they know they have to kill him before January 1st. This conspiracy includes his butler, the commander of his Praetorian Guard, and his favorite lover. They try to poison him on the night of December 31st, 192. Classic procrastinator move. But Commodus vomits up the poison, so they send in a young wrestler named Narcissus, who strangles Commodus in his bed. And with all due respect to the filmmakers behind Gladiator, which has Commodus as its villain, I feel his actual death is a lot more poetic than the one they gave him. The emperor who fancied himself an elite athlete, the man so egotistical he tried to rename all the months and the city of Rome after himself, murdered by a wrestler named Narcissus. Commodus is of course condemned to damnatio memoriae, and his legacy is one of cruelty and megalomania. His murder is the end of the Nervan-Antonian Dynasty and the beginning of another civil war. The dynasty that succeeded by adopting competent adult heirs fails as soon as Marcus Aurelius lets his teenage son inherit. Alright, time for a final review. Match the Nervan-Antonian emperors to their attributes. And here's how you should have matched them. The 5 good emperors are one of the most idealized eras of Roman history. More than any other period, they reflect what historians call the beneficial ideology, the idea that an emperor should hang on to power by making their subjects' lives better. But if you take a closer look, their legacies are complicated by wars of expansion, internal conflict, and palace intrigue, just like every other ruler. The Nervan-Antonian Dynasty comes crashing down through the reign of the narcissistic Commodus, the gladiator emperor. After him, it takes a century for Rome to regain anything like the stability it enjoyed during the reigns of his predecessors. Perhaps it is that contrast that made historians so willing to believe that the 5 good emperors were so special. In our next video, civil war will grip Rome again in the year of the 5 emperors, before Septimius Severus establishes the Severan dynasty. But Rome won't enjoy the same stability as under the 5 good emperors for another 100 years. Get ready, we've got some really strange times about to start.